You mentioned, before we actually sort of spoke to each other, you'd sent a sort of quick summary through of some of the things that had happened on that deployment, and you talked about a lot of your missions being troops in contact, and some of them were danger close. Which is that 50 meters? Is that what danger close means? It's 30 meters.
It can vary, and it's kind of just based on the weapon. Okay. There's a couple different numbers that we would use to say that, this has a high likelihood of also hitting a friendly, or also,
Okay.
So
where I was going with the question was really whether you did a lot of that work was always under the control of a JTAC, or if you were independently prosecuting attacks against targets on the ground, and really, having mentioned 10 minutes or so ago all these different factions on the ground, how you knew who was who.
So keeping track of who was who was a huge problem, I'd say. Exactly. And even for some of our U.S. guys that were supporting our partner forces, the guys on the ground can't usually keep everybody. It's kind of like herding cats sometimes. They don't really know. Sometimes whoever the JTAC is won't have 100% SA on like exactly where every single partner force is, because sometimes they don't report their positions accurately. Sometimes they're whatever, and then they're taking contact, and the JTAC's trying to do his best job of saying that, like, okay, I'm 95% sure they're at this building right here. The bad guys are at this building. You need to drop a bomb on this building over here, or whatever. So for us, it was we relied mostly on the professionalism of the JTACs to be able to do that, and the JTACs were able to use all kinds of other technology and stuff to help them manage that. But it was a big issue for sure. Some of the robots in the stack helped them with that based on their sensors, and they were able to follow friendlies and track friendlies and stuff. But once you start employing dynamically in the Strike Eagle, sometimes you have to choose whether you're going to track friendlies or you're going to prosecute a target, with your sensors, because you'll have to put, your sniper pod into the target, or, whatever it is. When we're flying as a two ship, sometimes we can handle that differently, where we can have number one may maintain track of the friendlies, while number two prosecutes the attack, et cetera, or you can swap depending on what the likelihood of weapons that you have, and whether it's going to be a bomb on target or bomb on coordinate or whatever the structure of the 9-line is. But to answer your question, yeah, it's very hard to keep track. We had some tips and tricks I think we were using once we became a little bit more experienced with the guys that we were working with, and we knew them pretty well. We could actually look down and tell, like, we knew what the movement of the SDF looked like. Like, we could tell how they were moving and tell that they were the SDF, or we knew, specific things about ISIS where we used to say, okay, we're pretty sure that's ISIS, or whatever it is. So we had some warm and fuzzies when it came to that, although those weren't, the definitive line in the sand about who is who and where they were at.
So one of the things that I was lucky enough to, in the aftermath of the 391st Fighter Squadron at Mountain Home, they went out to Afghanistan immediately after 9/11. I think it was October or something, actually, after 9/11. When they came back, they talked a lot about some of the missions they were flying, and a lot of working together as two ships and four ships, buddy lasing, and some fairly, by the sounds of it, some very complex stuff that they did for what was, in effect, just simply blowing stuff up on the ground. Was there a lot of that went on? Did you fly two ships, four ships? What sort of complexity was there in the actual employment of the airplane?
Yeah, so for two ships, that was kind of our standard operating out the door as a two ship. We had some attacks that were super complicated, but they were well within Strike Eagle's capabilities, and we did them we came up with some really cool solutions to problems that we hadn't really thought about before. And some of them involved buddy lasing, which is where, one jet will drop the bomb, the other jet will laze the bomb in. And that takes a little bit of work. And there's a couple of reasons that would push you to be able to do that. One of them would be that the aircraft dropping the bomb is not going to be able to get his laser on the target through the end time of fall of the weapon. So your buddy may be in a better position with his laser spot. And sometimes the further you are away from, a building or whatever the target is, you have this issue that we call laser spot size. So it's kind of like a flashlight. When you shine it at the wall, the further you move out, the bigger the spot gets. Well, the bomb sees that as well. So the smaller you can make that spot, normally the bomb will fly to that spot, so it creates a little bit more accurate weapon. The bigger the spot is, sometimes you can get into problems with the bomb may not fly exactly to the centroid of that spot, et cetera. So if you want an accurate bomb, you need a really small laser spot, spot size in order to be able to hit it and stuff. So sometimes buddy lasing would afford you the ability to do that, or there was a lot of times where we had weather as well. So we could have another Strike Eagle who would be in a more advantageous situation weather-wise to be able to see the target. You'd have the other guy who would drop through the clouds or whatever. And, so we did quite a few of those. We did double and triple downs, which are dropping 3 different types of bombs on one pass, which were slightly complicated because the way it works is, generally speaking, the first bomb you drop, if you're headed towards the target, is going to be the last bomb that impacts, because the jet is moving slightly faster than the weapon is. So if you drop one bomb at, say, 5 or 6 miles or whatever, and then you drop the next bomb at 4 miles, the bomb at 4 miles that you drop is going to get to the target faster than the one that you dropped before. So that impact from the last bomb that you drop off the jet is going to be the first impact. So you can time that. And then we started doing things like doing variable fusing for each of those weapons. So if we had a case, like a Mark 82 case, which was a general purpose case, but if you delayed the fuse for, X amount of milliseconds, what would happen is you'd have case break and then the fuse would dud. So the bomb wouldn't actually explode. So what we needed to do was start burrowing in a building or something. And we would do that by having one bomb with a 5 millisecond delay blow up a hole. A second later, another bomb goes in, blows up another hole, so you start stair-stepping these bombs in. And depending on the case and how you want to be able to attack this building, sometimes that was the only answer that you had. We would love to have penetrating cases like Blue 109 bomb bodies, but sometimes you didn't have that. Sometimes we just had GP bombs. And so how do we get into to the seventh floor of a building with a GP case when we know that, if we set a long delay on the fuse, it's just going to dud. This was kind of our answer. And then we had some other things where we had a building that ISIS had full up occupied as their, machine gun outpost for the city. And they had machine guns in pretty much every window. And the JTAC was like, we just really just need to blow this thing up. It's like, it's nothing good is in this building right now. And so we tried doing this thing called a kneecap, and it was like a low impact angle on a bomb that would hit the base of the building and get the building to collapse over. And that was kind of a challenge because we needed to get the impact angle of the bomb right to hit the base of this to be able to fall down. And so there's a lot of clever weaponeering that we went through, and none of these were in any manuals about, anywhere. And some people in the Nellis area would scoff at us for what we were doing, but we would point to it and say, "Hey, listen, it worked," So
yeah. Did you manage to bring that building down?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yep. So
Are those things then, are they sort of canned tactics that you already know about, or are you required to have the mental dexterity in the jet to do the calculations and figure out what the fusing should be and which one should go first? I mean, if you know you want to do achieve a particular effect, is there just simply a game plan that you get out and just say, well, this is exactly how we do it?
No, it actually, there are some foundational baseline general knowledge that about, this bomb is going to be good on this type for this type of effect. This bomb is going to be good penetrating this. But one of the problems that you run into when you go into any type of different environment is that the concrete density in Syria might be different than the concrete density in Iraq. So therefore, your delays on your fusing might be completely different, or the building that you're attacking is built differently than the building next to it. Therefore, you're going to need a different weaponeering combo. So for the Wizzos, that was sort of the bread and butter of them being able to study and know exactly that, hey, I could get a GBU-39 or an SDB into this type of a building with this type of effect, and be able to do that really, really well, to the point where we were taking back knowledge and saying, hey, listen, we tried this, this worked, or hey, we tried this and it didn't work. We recommend doing this in the future based on this fuse. And every once in a while, we would get a rash of fuses that would dud at certain delay settings, and then we'd find out, what delay setting those, and then fix them and stuff. And it was a constant learning process and evolution of tactics that you were doing. And you could reasonably expect that in any wartime scenario that you should be able to have the mental dexterity to be able to consistently evolve tactics to be able to meet your mission objective. There's not just a, one playbook that and then that's it. You have to call audibles every once in a while and try to figure out where, how you can pick through the defense.
It's interesting. You talked about corporate knowledge a couple of times, and I suppose if I just mentioned interviewing guys in sort of early 2002 who had been out to Afghanistan and for enduring freedom. So urban warfare in those sorts of sort of desert environments and sort of those countries effectively had been going on for some time. You would assume that all that you needed to know had already been learnt. Is that an unfair assumption?
I would like to think that if we knew everything, we would have already solved all of the problems that we have. But there's also a component of guys will learn a lot, and for whatever reason, the squadron behind them just doesn't soak it in or doesn't care, Same thing with some units that rip out other units, and especially when you have kind of a rotation of folks going in every 6 months or 8 months or 9 months or 12 months or whatever it is. Those guys just may not, care to learn everything from the unit in front of them. And the unit in front of them may be too tired to say, hey, listen, this is everything that we learned, because I still find myself in, trivial arguments with guys here about, how to get a GB12 into a cave or something like that. And they'll say something and I'll say, have you ever actually done that before? No, I haven't. And I was like, okay, well, that's not going to work because, we did that all the time. And this is how you do it. And so there's still a knowledge gap that I feel like people learn the same lessons over and over and over and over again. And then some of them don't really, give enough thought to how things are going to evolve over time and stuff, and how the enemy is learning what you're doing because you're out there demonstrating everything that you're, all of your tactics. So the enemy is consistently learning stuff, and they're able to, they're not dumb. The ISIS guys were brutal and absolutely crazy and terrible, but they weren't stupid in a lot of tactical scenarios. Like they were doing some pretty clever things, and occasionally you would get guys that because all the guys that survived in ISIS were usually the clever guys. So they were coming up with some, unique things that we had to figure out how to. Oh, okay, all right. Well, we'll have to figure out how to solve this problem or whatever. And I think that's true across combat writ large. So I don't know if that's what you're asking specifically.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, isn't it? I mean, the term corporate knowledge, suggests that it's just in someone's head rather than codified in a tactics manual or whatever. And it's just, I suppose, I'm just curious. I think, to know whether or not guys, they're probably retired by now, but if you went and talked to somebody who was flying in 2001. And said to them, were you doing these things because these guys are learning about them now? And to hear whether or not they would say, well, yeah, I could have told them that. Or, and I suppose sort of that you talked about the joint programmable fuse and new weapons. And so perhaps that changes the picture too. So, so can we talk a little bit about Russia then? Well, not Russia, the country, but the Russian forces who were in theatre. What can you say about those forces and your interactions with them and your experience in general?
So we had some interesting experiences with the Russians. They were obviously supporting Assad. They were targeting ISIS and the Syrian rebels that were trying to overthrow Assad as well. So in some ways we had goals that were lined up, and then in some ways we didn't. And from the aircrew perspective, one of the things that we tried to become very familiar with was what was the administration's stance on Russia, and what was their strategy in the Middle East? What was Russia's strategy in the Middle East, and then what was the U.S.'s strategy in the Middle East, and then how exactly did the administration, the DoD, want us to handle our interactions with the Russians? And, we often wondered what kind of back channel stuff was going on with the Russians, and how we were coordinating things or deconflicting things and stuff. I think, honestly, once everything's out there, I don't really think, should have caveat this up front with everything I'm saying is that, my view is not the DoD's view. So everything that I'm saying is completely of my own opinion, as it were. So it's not an official position at all. I should have said that up front, but what I got out of it and what I kind of believed was that I didn't think Russia was interested in starting World War III in Syria, and I don't think the U.S. was interested in starting World War III. But I do think that there were some escalation pathways that we didn't quite acknowledge at the time, and we didn't see. And part of the challenge for aircrew specifically was trying to identify escalation pathways and then de-escalate things to the maximum extent we could while preserving our own forces and not exposing them to unnecessary risk. So it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier said than done. I guess I would throw the analogy out there of like, if you go into a bar and somebody's shit talking you into a bar, it's, do you want to get into a fight in the bar? Or do you want to try to de-escalate things? Is it worth it? So there's 100 other variables, right, that are going on there. And that was essentially how Syria was. There was a ton of different variables. Our mission was pretty specific, that we were countering ISIS, and we were trying to work through ISIS and then try to restabilize Iraq. So if things escalated with the Russians, that would naturally take away from our mission with ISIS. And a lot of it was unnecessary, I don't know. We just didn't really. We were going to protect the Americans at all costs that we could, but at the same time, we got to figure out how to kind of pat our head and rub our belly at the same time when it comes to how do you de-escalate things, and then how do you protect Americans, which, like I was telling you before, a lot of people will shit talk the Syrian scenario as, well, that's not the World War II scenario where it's super non-permissive, whatever. Syria is very permissive and it's easy and it's just cast and all this sort of stuff. But realistically, the decisions that guys were making were extremely complicated decisions on whether or not to shoot, down a Russian or shoot down a Syrian or whatever it was. And a lot of those were not clear cut at all. They were extremely gray decisions, and they had tremendous consequences that went with them. But at the end of the day, most of the aircrew were, adamant about protecting the guys on the ground, and they would do it as much as the rules of engagement would allow them to. And then there was a sort of a component of the nature of the fight, and having Americans in Syria was exposing those Americans to a level of risk that you couldn't entirely mitigate. There were certain scenarios that were going on where you couldn't mitigate risk at all times. So that was more on the ground commanders within Syria to, if they wanted to buy that risk or not, if it was worth the objective of taking ISIS. And from when we got there in 2017, the way that the war was going at that point was they were very adamant about, we want to make sure that we kill out ISIS. Like, let's not, screw around. Let's just do it and get it over with. So that's why we ramped up strikes, and that's why things became a little bit more focused on just making it happen, as it were. So I don't know if that danced around the question or answered it at all.
It does.
Okay. Yeah. The Russians were, the Russians were an interesting group of cats for sure. We had a rough deconfliction with them in 2017 of basically like, you guys stay on this side of the river, we'll stay on this side of the river. And then that never really got, it wasn't really that solid. So we had a couple instances with the Russians where we thought that they were escalating things by dropping extremely close to U.S. positions. And we weren't sure if they had bad intel or whatever it was. And we tried to mitigate it to the max extent that we could. We ended up doing that against a Su-34 that dropped really close to a U.S. position. And we ended up doing this thing called a headbutt, which is, flying in front of them and dropping out some flares. And he seemed to think, what the hell are you guys doing? And all these flares are coming out. And, oh, by the way, this was at nighttime and semi in the clouds. It was broken weather, and there's some 57 millimeter coming out from Daz at the same time. They were shooting at the Russians and us, and ISIS was, and it was a big cluster. But so things got kind of out of hand in one of those scenarios, and we ended up merging, getting pretty close to a Su-30 at night, which was, another interesting thing. But the whole idea really was that the aircrew needed to try to figure out a way to de-escalate the situation. The last thing we wanted to do was, the Russians go full court press and start shooting down some of our AFSOC guys, and we have to do CSAR over or combat search and rescue over Deir ez-Zor, an ISIS country, or whatever it is. We didn't want the situation to get worse, and at the same time, we weren't really interested in war with the Russians, and same kind of went with the Syrians. Despite that whole Hornet shoot down of the fitter in North Syria, which was around about the same time as our shoot down of the Iranian Shaheed. But it was, how much do you want to escalate with these guys? And is it really worth it, in the end? So.
The Russians have got a very, it's sort of admirable in a way that they do what they want to do. That's how it appears to me, at least. And there's that video of the Su-27 almost ramming into an F-15C. I think it was a Lakenheath Eagle, just super aggressive. Is there a part of you? Because when I think about that, I think, well, how would I respond to that? And I think, thank goodness, I'm not an Eagle pilot, because I probably wouldn't have responded to it in the right way. But is there a part of you that feels like, so okay, you've got the rules, you know what you can and can't do, and you've already explained that you don't want to escalate because that could result in some other friendlies getting shot down and so on and so forth. But is there a part of you that thinks, well, actually, I just also have to maintain the higher ground, be the maturer of the two? Or does the sort of type A sort of personality kick in and you just think, well, fuck it, I just want to shoot them down?
Well, who doesn't want to be the first to shoot down a flanker or whatever? And I think the flanker pilots would probably say the same about us to that point. But there's a level of professionalism that comes with fighter pilots. Let's say that you're an officer in the art of war, first and foremost, and despite what your ambitions are or whatever, and I just want to go out and, shoot this guy down or whatever. I don't know. That never really crossed my mind too much. I guess you could call it, like, you have to have very controlled aggression. And that's one of the disciplined things about, being a fighter pilot. One of the mottos of the 482nd, which was, my squadron during the deployment, was violent, tactical, and disciplined. And you had to be very disciplined about what you're going to do, and that takes it. It's easier said than done sometimes, and sometimes you get caught up in the moment, and you don't know what he's going to do, and he's got you in a weapons engagement zone, and if you don't shoot first, you're going to die, and all these thoughts will go through your mind. But at the same time, you have to just bitch, be cool, just slow down, chill out, just figure out, okay, I need to get leverage on the situation, or maybe I can de-escalate this somehow. Especially, and Russia's a little bit of a different animal, that we're not at war with Russia, right? So the U.S., sure, we were staring across, at the Soviet Union for quite a long time, but we're not at war with Russia, yet or whatever. And we have to be very tempered to say that, is this small little action in, the Baltics gonna, or, with a B-52 or a C model or, whatever it is this really what I want to, sell the farm for, as it were? So one thing that I've been very impressed with, at least, was the level of professionalism from pilots, and especially in the RAF and then in the United States Air Force, of a level of professionalism walking out the door and saying that these situations that we get into are what we thrive in, and we can handle the stress in a very cool, calm, and collected manner, and then be able to prosecute whenever we need to. So as soon as that, guy's declared hostile, we can go out and we can win with no problem. But up until that point, though, we have to have a level of discipline that, tempers what's going on. And some guys will call bullshit on that. And, I'm aggressive. If he ever, spiked into me, I'd turn around and I'd shoot him or whatever. And like, okay, sweet, so.
What about the sort of the bomb dropping scenario, though? So you've got somebody who is potentially going to drop a bomb on an American or a coalition sort of ground unit. Do you just call them up? Can you just use the guard frequency and just say, hey, do you guys know you're going to drop something that could kill some Americans? I mean, how do you actually, other than the headbutt, how do you make sure that, because I think you already mentioned maybe they've got some bad intel or whatever. How do you, there must be a way of saying to them, hey, don't do it.
Yep. The guard frequency is normally the first, if they're up on guard, then we can try. I don't speak very good Russian, so I don't know if they would understand what I'm saying. And we'll leave it to AWACS. Normally they, throw out the guard warnings on there to give them a chance to be able to say, oh, yep, we messed up that or whatever, or we weren't tracking that there was a U.S. position there. We had that situation, obviously, in the south of Syria with the Iranians and the Shaheed, and then it being unmanned was a little bit easier decision to just go ahead and shoot it down when we did. And even though we weren't officially at war with Iran, and then that led to that was a kind of complicated situation, as it were. But as far as the headbutt is not a ideal tactic going out the door with at all either, because you're kind of escalating things. You're throwing, if you're throwing flares out of the jet, then he doesn't know if maybe that's a missile coming off. We have no idea. We can't really get into his head about what he's expecting. Does he see us in time? Is this just this fighter that just breaks right into him? Is he tracking that we're even there? And then you're kind of shining your ass at him because you're opening yourself up to a Wes as soon as you do a headbutt for the most part. So it's not, from every fighter pilot, is not your preferred, technique to try to de-escalate things. But at the end of the day, if they messed up to the point of, dropping on friendlies, like he's already pretty much signed up for what's going to happen next. And I thought the coalition, at least in OIR, was pretty clear about self-defense when it came to saying that, if this happens, like, we're going to defend the U.S. and, we'll talk about it, in Geneva some other time, but this is what we're going to do, right now to be able to do it. So I thought that was pretty clear. Whereas, I always wondered about Afghanistan from that. The temperament in Afghanistan was completely different than what was going on in Syria. Those were two completely different places that had completely different, really kind of a whole different outlook on the rules of engagement and stuff. So yeah, that was pretty interesting.
You mentioned now a couple of times the Iranian drone. So tell us about that then, because your squadron shot 2 AMRAAMs, didn't it, during that deployment? I'm sure you said they shot 2 AMRAAMs.
Yeah, that's right.
They weren't both at the drone, were they?
There was 2 AIM-120s that went to 2 different Shaheeds. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us the stories?
Yeah, sure. The first one, I was flying in the backseat of a guy named Maestro Rankin, who was our squadron commander at the time. And we had 2 guys on the, another crew on the wing, a great dude. This guy, Alex Harvey, Boss Harvey, ended up going to the F-35. And then this other guy, Sith Lombardo, that he's an FTU instructor right now. And they were incredible wingmen. And we were supporting a Green Beret team that was training a group of partner forces down in South Syria. And things had started escalating a little bit with the Iranian militias around there and the Syrians. And they had a couple little firefights between, groups. And there was a predator that had responded to a vehicle that was driving super fast at this Green Beret team, and ended up taking it out with a Hellfire and stuff. So that kind of sets the pace of things started escalating a little bit between everybody. And again, it was kind of one of those self-defense scenarios. So we started doing our normal defensive counter-air cap, and the drones were a little bit tricky to pick up on our radars at the time. We had the old radar, the APG-70. So, they're pretty slow. They're not very big. So anyways, we ended up finding one of them, and it wasn't uncommon to see a bunch of different drones out in Syria, because it was Syria, and, we didn't own Syria at the time, or we weren't, so the Iranians could fly as many drones as they wanted to in Syria, and we weren't at war with Iran and we weren't at war with Syria. So, whatever. Anyways, so so that had started escalating and stuff, and we kind of knew going on. We had picked up a Shahed 129 that's roughly about the size of a Predator, and it had two of the what's basically like a Iranian version of a Hellfire on the wings, and we saw that in the pod. And so I thought, well, I think this could start to escalate a little bit more, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Iranians came over and wanted to shoot at, at least close to the Americans or at our partner forces or something like that, based on what had just happened, kind of a tit for tat sort of thing. And we found it, and we were getting kind of low in gas, and we had to go to the tanker, and we wanted to try to time our trip to the tanker to be able to get back on station by the time this thing had, gotten close to the friendlies, because it's only moving at 100 knots or so or whatever. So we go to the tanker, come back, and I'm talking to the JTAC, and the JTAC says, hey, I think this dude just shot at us. And we're like, oh, all right, well, we'll shoot him down. And so we told the KAC that, and the KAC said, or Taxi 2 said, nope, don't shoot him down. We're going to do some non-kinetic effects. And, I rolled my eyes, and we had a conversation between the both of us, and I was like, let's just shoot it down. And so he's like, no. Just see if this non-kinetic effects, see if they work or whatever. And so two Russian flankers had appeared on station right behind us. So they were about 6,000 feet in trail and locking us up, and we locked up this Shahed, and it started to get closer to the friendlies, to this American position. And we found out that the first Hellfire that they shot had dudded and landed kind of like in the desert-ish. So it was worthy to be a hostile act, but thankfully it hadn't killed anybody. So the rules, kind of the hostile act, hostile intent, kind of allowed us to deem that, Iranian drone as hostile. Therefore, we could shoot it down, which was the preferred course of action, at least that I preferred. And we uncaged the AIM-9, which we had these shitty AIM-9 mics on the jet, and then uncaged it, and the Seeker didn't do shit. So we ended up winning, going to the AIM-120, and the KAC said, hey, we're still working non-kinetics or whatever. It didn't appear to be doing anything. It still ended up being tracking straight towards the friendlies. And I was like, listen, like, the KAC, they don't know what's going on right now. AWACS doesn't know what's going on right now. Let's just shoot and, whatever. So we have this long conversation that goes back and forth. And then, so the front seat, so Maestro sets it up, and he says, well, we're going to shoot it down. I just don't want all this wreckage to land on the Syrians and then them freak out and then this whole thing go crazy. And we also didn't want to set it up to the point where, if this AMRAAM comes off and it accidentally picks up one of the flankers, and you shoot down a Russian, sets off this whole Mexican standoff thing that we have going on. So we didn't want that. We didn't want the Russians to get super spooked, even though they were spiking into us and they had us in a very weird position. Essentially, they were telling us, don't shoot this Shahed down. And so we had our wingmen swing out and then lock up the other flanker behind him. And then this other flanker locked him up. So it was a full up, Mexican standoff that was going on. And anyways, decided, hey, listen, we're just going to shoot. And so we shot the AIM-120, and it ended up splashing the Shahed, and he didn't shoot any more Hellfires at the U.S. dudes on the ground. So we were pretty much at bingo, slightly below bingo at the time, based on that the length of that engagement and how much we had grabbed from the tanker, which was evidently not enough, but it was more of a matter of trying to get back on time, whatever. The guys on the ground were a little bit upset that it had taken that long based on the non-kinetic effect coordination with the KAC, and then so it was kind of a huge cluster, and the guys on the ground weren't super happy about it. But at the same time, they're in Syria, and it's not like we own Syria, and we weren't at war with Iran. So there is a level of risk that you assume, from the ground force component's perspective, and you just can't shoot everybody all the time to, make this little enclave for yourself. But, we tried the best we could to do both. So we ended up shooting it, and then we weren't really down with the whole non-kinetic effect thing. We didn't really, jamming or whatever. We didn't really think that was working, and it's impossible to tell if it's working, other than, I don't know. So anyways, we just decided that, whatever, we're just going to shoot it. And we shot. And then we had 2 Hornets that were late to rip us out, and which we were a little bit upset about, but hey, whatever. And then we gave them an AO handoff and said, hey, listen, we think that there's a Su-22 taken off from Taiz, which is, a little bit north of there. And we don't have the gas to stick around. But, hey, we just shot down this Iranian drone. You guys have it. Good luck. Like, this whole thing's going to explode. Here you go. And they were definitely not fenced in for that. It was, for them, it was probably going to be a little bit more of a standard, one each DCA cap where nothing happens out of the ordinary. And here we were, we just called a splash on the radio with a bullseye and all this sort of stuff, which you never hear. So we start our, kind of super fuel conserving climb back to our base because we had like no gas, and we listened to the events that happened next, which were super unfortunate, and were not the Hornet. It was not the Hornet shoot down that would happen later, like 10 days later up in Raqqa. It was a different series of events, which I won't go into, but it ended up making the KAC super mad, which then drove some of the events that happened in Raqqa. But anyways, we landed, which was kind of cool because normally fighters go at the end of the runway, they get de-armed. So you have an arming crew out there and a de-arming crew, and they safe up the weapons and stuff if you have any on there, and safe up the chaff and flare and stuff. And I remember looking at the armament guys coming up to the jet, and they noticed that there was an AMRAAM missing. Mm-hmm. And you could tell that the way they looked at me and looked at Maestro, they were like, did it fall off? Did we just lose one in the desert? Was it our fault? Did we not whatever? And so we gave them a thumbs up, like it was, everything was like it should be. And then they were super happy. And then we shut down the jet and got out, and all the maintainers could not have been happier that a live AMRAAM had come off the jet. And then we got to talking about, we did our debrief, went over the situation, what could we have done better? How could we have responded a little bit faster maybe, or how could we have made the ROE, work to our advantage or whatever. And it was definitely not an easy problem to solve. And up to that point, shooting something with an AIM-120 was super taboo. I mean, that hadn't been done for quite some time, and it was not normal, as it were. So from our cockpit too, we didn't know how the KAC was going to react to that. We honestly didn't know that they could have been like, how dare you, you just ruined everything, or whatever. We had this doped and you guys ruined it. But they ended up being okay with the situation, how it happened and stuff. But it was definitely not an easy seal to break, if that makes sense.
Did there, was there any comeback then? Did anybody pick up the phone and say, hey, you need to come and explain to me why you made the decision, or did you just move on to the next mission?
Yeah, we had a few emails that kind of went back and forth. Mostly the ground component wasn't super excited about the timeliness and the coordination required, and they wanted to make sure that for future coordination. There was a line in the sand about, what would we describe as a hostile act, or what would we describe as hostile intent, because we weren't officially at war with Iran or Syria. So therefore, in order to be able to, in order to be able to make self-defense your reason for shooting them down, you kind of had to have some sort of a definition to say that, hey, listen, if this happens, this is worthy of self-defense. And then you have to take that scenario and get it to the aircrew and say, hey, listen, if this scenario happens at this time, like, this is when you go master arm hot, press the pickle button. And that wasn't really fleshed out at all up until that Shaheed shoot down. After that is when they took it a lot more serious, and they're like, oh, well, I guess, maybe this situation can happen, because we had definitely gone through, at least some of us, lower level people had, asked the question several times, hey, listen, if this theoretical scenario happens, what do you want me to do? And, usually it was just crickets. And nobody really wanted to take ownership to say, yeah, man, just, shoot them down or whatever. Nobody wanted to say that. So you're like, well, when do you want me to shoot them down? And they're like, you just have to know. And you're like, I don't know what to do with that, and so it didn't give you the warm and fuzzies that you were making a fully up blessed, decision. At the same time, though, as long as you knew the ROE, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, if you knew the ROE and you knew that you could be justified full up on self-defense or whatever it was, and say that, hey, listen, I knew the ROE and I was operating in accordance with the ROE, and these were my indicators that I was using, then you would have a legal foot to stand on. And I hate being the guy that is like, well, legal this or legal that. But at the same time, war operates within a structure of, it's the Western way of war. And it's just how we do things. So we had to know that. And those are really tricky decisions to make. So,
well, what about the second shoot down and the second AIM-120 launch?
The second one was actually pretty funny. There's a lot of inside knowledge that happened on that one. That it was pretty comical. So at that point, we'd kind of made our decision about what constitutes a hostile act, and this Shaheed did it, no problem. And the dude, so it was a wingman who found it. And like a good wingman, he said, hey, lead, I found this Shaheed, right here. And lead said, cool, and turned around and shot it. And so it was kind of funny for us because, the flight lead just shot it instead of the wingman. The wingman found it. The wingman did all the work. The flight lead just said, cool, took it Fox 3, so it was good. It was a good time. And that one worked out a little bit easier. It's kind of a crazy time though, as we were deployed, like starting to hear of, so we shot down that Shaheed, the Hornet then shoots down the fitter, and then we shoot down another Shaheed. We were like, wow, this, there's 3 shoot downs within a month. Man, shit's getting real, and so we were going out the door, and everybody was, every air crew that stepped was like, we're going to be the next ones to shoot something down, or whatever. We hope we are. And then we had to temper that with saying, hey guys, it's super fangs out, because everybody wanted a piece of that. And then you had to, hey guys, don't unnecessarily escalate the situation just because, you want your name on a wall somewhere,
Do you get bragging rights for shooting down a drone? Is that something? The light grey guys coming in and sort of laughing at you for doing that, or is that a serious accomplishment?
So from my experience, no one gives a shit. So nobody cares. It's a non-event. It's like I dropped a GB38 on something. Nobody cares. And then, I mean, to be fair, like, you know, I don't know. It's whatever. I don't care. Supposedly you're supposed to get a tour of the Raytheon factory and all that sort of stuff. I never got it. So, you know, so I never got anything. I think I don't even know if I got a coin from Raytheon for that thing. Yeah, literally, like pretty much from the outside perspective, like nobody cares. They put a star on the jet that shot it down, and I don't know if anybody remembers who shot it down or whatever. But it's in the community. It was kind of like a interesting but not compelling thing, and for both of them. So I suspect in the future we'll probably have a lot more UAV shoot downs based on the kind of the nature of combat right now. So I don't know, maybe it'll get more notoriety, but the old deal is the man fighter, then you really do that. So yeah.